Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of our travel guides exploring a certain location in Europe. This is Dr. Lillian Cespedes Gonzalez, tour guide, historian, and travel arranger, planner, whatever you want to call it, bringing you this time not a country but a very specific city. So, today we're going to be exploring the beautiful city of Prague, which is, renowned for far too many things that we're going to be, looking at through today. Now, the purpose of this lecture is not just exploring the city of Prague overall, which is a very common destination, particularly in the winter months, and one of the reasons why we're doing this now in February. But also because I feel that a lot of people think that they need either too little or too much time in Prague, and I wanted to share a little bit of insight. The itinerary that we're going to be looking at today is literally based on my own personal holiday and many, many recommendations and plans that I've made for other people in literally 4 days. Now, mind you, this is a very intensive journey, but it is doable. And it is doable at a moment in time in Prague where the light is actually not abundant because it will get dark soon, and in temperatures that don't necessarily allow you to be walking around all day. So this is also a way for us to kind of educate the public and help you understand that you can still travel in the winter even though it may be dark. This is simply something that requires a little bit of adjusting and making the most out of what the city has to offer, when and how. So let's dive into Prague overall. So this is what we're going to be looking at today. The first day, we're literally just going to be spending it exploring the old town. It's kind of mandatory whenever you go to any town. Well, I say mandatory, but if you're interested in history and culture, which is what we do, you kind of have to go to the origin of each city, because otherwise you're missing the point of how the town came to be. Now, a city like Prague, has history left, right, and center. One of the greatest things about it is in a wonderful state of conservation. So there is a lot of things to see. So we're gonna lay things out in such a way that you will, be able to get highlights and not miss some very important places. On the second day, we're gonna go to the castle and things that are nearby the castle. We feel that a lot of people kind of get stuck in the castle and never leave that area, when actually nearby there are some very interesting things to see and do that you can combine with the castle. Frankly, unless you are very much into the castle and into the cathedral and you're going to be looking at everything for hours on end, you don't need a whole day to explore Prague Castle at all. But then again, it depends, on your speed and what have you not. And then day three is actually very important if, like me, you have Jewish heritage in your family, or if you're just interested in the subject. Prague is one of those locations in Europe that, delivers 100% what it says on the tin in these regards. It's one of those locations that if you're interested in that subject, you must go eventually at one moment in your life. And it is actually, I would say, quite an emotional experience. So I guess also what I'm trying to say is, be warned, because, well, as with many other parts of history, when there is elements that have a certain degree of, I guess, generational or social trauma, just be mindful and also be very respectful. I appreciate that the world is now in a very strange place and people have strange perceptions of people of different backgrounds. This is not to suggest that we are supporting specific countries in the Middle East doing essentially genocide. That's not the point at all. But like with many other people in history, whether they are now persecuting or whatever, Jewish people have a very specific viewpoint throughout the majority of European history, and it's important to actually realize where this comes from, and not to, justify what the country of Israel is doing, but sometimes extremes don't just happen overnight, guys, and there are reasons, even though not necessarily justifiable, why, well, essentially people end up doing some very atrocious things, sometimes in retaliation, which is not necessarily, like I said, something that we can justify, but that we can at least understand. And if we can understand, hopefully in the future, we can move past these issues or learn to be better. So that is the deal over there. And finally, on day four, I want to do the bonus highlights. These are things that I found that were really cool and not a lot of people go to see in Prague. I can say this because while I was visiting these places, I was quite literally the only person in those places. Now, I appreciate this was in the middle of February, so not necessarily the height of, peak season, but even then in, high season, I am perfectly aware they are not necessarily the areas that most tourists would necessarily attend. So just to give you an edge over what you can do in Prague, besides the XYZ that everybody does. Now, let's dive into the Old Town first things first. Well, the Old Town of Prague, like I said, is one of the most popular destinations in Europe because it has a lot of rich history and it's just so beautifully aesthetic. It doesn't really matter if you know a lot about the history of Prague, just walking around it is a very pleasant town. Like you will immerse yourself into the general vibe of the city, which is incredibly beautiful and vibrant. It's one of those places that it was hardly bombed during the Second World War. Damage was pretty much zero, and you really get a flavor of the evolution of the country, of the Czech Republic or Czechia, and Prague specifically as a city, thanks to its wonderful state of conservation. Now, you're going to notice a lot of things while walking through Prague that look a little bit peculiar, which is also the influence of different cultures and countries over time. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that Prague was actually capital for the Holy Roman Empire for a little while. It was also seat of power for the Habsburg rule and, of course, the capital of the Kingdom of Bohemia. So, in terms of Central Europe, it doesn't get, much more popular than this, if you see what I mean. Now, the town of Prague is home to about 1,000,000.4 people. It is surrounded by UNESCO heritage, and we are now looking at one of the key squares, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And it's just a very walkable and just very likable town as well. Now, mind you, here in this square, in the main square, is where you're going to find as well the vast majority of agglomerations. Also, because nearby the square, in fact, just around the corner, is the town hall. Now, the town hall dates from the 14th century, and it was done through several expansions, to be honest. So it's almost like different houses were bought and then put together to make one singular building, which is quite peculiar. There is actually a guided visit that you can do to see the town hall, properly speaking, that also takes you inside. And I would very much recommend. I think a lot of people just go to the area of the town hall to see the astronomical clock, which of course is an important aspect of the city. But this is one of those sort of checklist kind of places. Oh, I want to see the astronomical clock, and then people don't even pay attention to the building that it's located itself. The guided tour is very affordable. It's normally not super crowded, and it lasts about an hour, hour and a half, so it's very walkable. If you are in the winter and it's cold, it's one of those great things that you can do. Plus, you will be able to see part of the mechanism of the clock from the inside, which is also another way of actually enjoying this big touristic attraction in that regards. So, very much recommended. Now, the other thing that is very important, or that I think is a good idea about the visit to the actual town hall, is of course the views. One of the most wonderful things that you can do in Prague, whichever building it is go as high as possible, because the aerial views of the town are generally quite charming, and it also helps you understand the way the city has developed, both from a geographical perspective and an architectural perspective. So the views from the town hall are actually included as part of your visit, and in comparison to some other places that may be a bit pricier or farther away, this is definitely one to take advantage of. And then, of course, the Orlog, right? How can I skip the elephant in the room? I mean, it is one of those wonders of, history in its specific niche. This astronomical clock dates from the 1400s, and although it's been reconstructed and renovated several times since, it is very much the only clock that is still operative of this age, and the third oldest in the world. There is actually two more that are older than the Orlog, but they are not actually still functional. They don't work. So that is I guess a big attestation to how well this thing was made, and the early projects of engineering that were actually going around in Europe at that moment in time. Well, the other thing that I think is important to appreciate once you are in Prague itself is the square. it's a beautiful square with a lot of historical meaning and access to a lot of buildings that are, way beyond cafeterias and whatnot. This is also the square where, if you're going during Christmas time, the Christmas market is located at, which is, by the way, considered one of the best in the whole world. So you will walk through this area, and I think most importantly, you need to understand part of the history around it. First things first, the statue that you see in here is the statue dedicated to Jan Hus, the commemoration of the 500 years of his death. Jan Hus actually is also mentioned in the town hall and is part of the guided tour and a very important part of the history of the Czech Republic and Prague. If you've been following this channel for a while, perhaps you've seen our lecture on the Lollards, and if not, I very much recommend that you go and see it. It's just, a few weeks back. Well, Jan Hus is this radical preacher that was inspired by the movement of Lollardy in England and that was actually burned at the stake for his beliefs. And this is actually going to be a very big thing because it's not just, a piece of the puzzle in the general history of religious freedom. The implication of Jan Hus in the world of theology and political science in the Czech Republic will lead to many, many wars, the Hussite wars actually, that will be super important from the point of view of political development, not just in Prague, but in the whole country, and particularly in the area of Bohemia. So this is one of those, landmarks, not just in terms of history as a whole, but for the development of actually many of the modern concepts that we have nowadays in terms of theology and religion, and that we often tend to forget about. So definitely one of those things that you must see. And the other thing that you must see while you're in here is access to the Gothic church of Our Lady Before Tin, which is the one with the interesting towers, and you can see them every so often in the pictures. The church itself inside is perhaps not the most magnificent church, but from the point of view of Gothic architecture, the outside is actually quite significant and one of those, let's say, highlights of the landscape through Prague. Now, I want to propose something else that you must do when you're walking around in the city center. Well, first of all, not part of this because obviously this was not open when I was visiting, but it's open now. Just in this area, they've just opened the new museum dedicated to Mucha. Mucha is one of those artists of the modern world that if you like art, you must know, and if you are in the Czech Republic or in Prague, is literally the place where to explore. So if you can, go to the new renovated Mucha Museum, which on top of that has made use of a building that was in need of, conservation to actually get in there. But something that not a lot of people actually associate with Prague or with the Czech Republic is Lego. Yeah, I know. Prague is actually home to the largest private collection of Lego in the world. In fact, it's a Guinness record. It has more than 1,000 square meters worth of Lego displays, which are honestly incredibly cool. And again, if you're going in the winter months and you are perhaps not having as much daylight, it's one of those activities that you can do very easily when the cold is settling in and at dark, because this is actually accessed through one of the Lego stores and it is open until quite late. So make use of the city. And not just that, if you're going with Lego aficionados or perhaps with children, I promise you it's actually quite a cool place to visit. The general idea is that, well, these are different monuments, not just of the city of Prague, but different Lego sets and whatnot that are of importance, historical or otherwise, in the world of Lego that are fully recreated and includes, of course, certain views of Prague that are important. But we will return to this building a little later for sure, because this is the National Museum and we will be talking about it in a few moments. Now, something else that I 100% recommend you do in Prague, and I don't always recommend this in cities with canal tours, but in Prague 100% do the canal tour. And again, if you can do it at night, is an extra. It's another activity that you can do until quite late in the evening for those of you who want to make the most of the day. I believe the last canal tours, even in the winter, are running as late as 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. and it will not disappoint. Prague is one of those towns that really you must see both in the daylight and at night to fully appreciate part of its charm. I mean, the views that you see in here, of course, with the castle at the back and part of the city center lit up, are wonderful. And from the canal, you also get that perspective that otherwise you wouldn't do, from either side of the embankment. Plus, a lot of the tours are quite affordable. I very much recommend you use platforms such as Viator, TripAdvisor, or Get Your Guide, which are platforms that I work with as a tour guide, so where I advertise my tours, but I also use when I go traveling or when I go arranging things for people because they are protected, so your money is protected and it's not given to the tour operator or tour guide until you've already completed the activity. So in case that you need to, rebook, cancel, whatever, it's easier to get access to, and it makes it easier as well to move the schedule, to get reminders and things like that. So one of those things to keep in mind, and those are actually verified and legit, so that way you cannot be concerned about being scammed or whatever. Viator and Get Your Guide do very high verification details to ensure that the people delivering the tours and activities are high profile, and if any problems are there, then you will also be backed up by them, which is an important thing. With Get Your Guide, I believe many of these tours you can book literally up to a couple of hours before it starts, so you don't need to go ahead of time. But keep in mind that particularly in the summer months, the canal tours get very popular. In the winter, I literally booked this the day before I went on the tour myself, and I know many people that have done that. The one thing to consider is that often these tours provide different amenities, and you need to be careful of what ticket you select to enjoy the activity appropriately. But for what we ended up enjoying, which was the tour canal plus some food, which is what's coming just on the screen. This was just buffet kind of food and a drink. I think we paid about 30 euros, and the duration of the whole thing was about 2 hours, 2 hours and a half. So you actually get pretty good value for money on that regards. And there was also music as part of the entertainment of the canal tour. So definitely one of those things that you should enjoy at some point. And if you want to see the entertainment, it's in one of the shorts here in the channel in Travolution. These are some of the views that you get actually from the canal tour, which is very lovely. And like I said, it just is worth the money. This is the view, of course, of the famous bridge of Charles Bridge, which is from the 14th century, and until the 19th century, it was the only river. It was the only river crossing point in the city. It's about, I think, it's 516 meters long, and well, the general concept behind the bridge is that it contains 30 statues from Baroque period, although most of them have now been removed and are replicas. It's a very nice way of engaging with the artistic background and important figures of the history of Prague. Well, now that we are fully done with our first day, let's move on to day two. Day two is the castle, Malastrana and beyond. Well, and this is quite literally known as the lesser town. That's what it translates into in English. And it's the district at the foot of Prague Castle. Most of the origin of this part of the city is from the time when the Habsburgs were in power. So the majority of this town was sort of grown from the Germanic population that moves into the area. And in the 13th century, it becomes a royal town with lots of medieval buildings. So it kind of is like a medieval village that then transitions into a new Renaissance village, which is actually quite an interesting way of experiencing the city, because a lot of the old town of Prague is kind of from the Baroque onwards. So here you get a bit of a mix in that regards. Mostly is now a residential area, and of course you have the access points to Prague Castle. Now it's a full complex. By the way, it's not just the castle, the cathedral, it's also here. And if you want to see St. Vitus Cathedral, you must go to the castle. Simple as. You cannot do one without the other. You can see the cathedral without seeing the castle, but, well, sort of. You will still have to go through the fortifications and the entrance, but they are a double package in that regards. Now, part of the buildings in the castle complex are the residence of the president nowadays. But the castle itself is full of amazing history. It dates back to the 9th century when it was first owned by the kings of Bohemia, and it is supposedly, because well, some of these things are often contested country by country, it is the largest medieval complex for a castle in Europe. It's about 70,000 square meters, which is an insane amount. And it contains also beautiful hidden gems like this. This is St. George's Basilica. It's actually the oldest surviving church in the area. It is from the 10th century, fully built in Romanesque architecture, and truly delightful. 100% recommend for those of you who are interested in the sort of earliest stages of the Middle Ages. I've seen very few early medieval buildings as well preserved as this one. And then, of course, St. Vitus Cathedral. St. Vitus Cathedral is hands down one of my favorite cathedrals in the whole world, period. Because how many cathedrals do you know that are Gothic that you get to and you just see, boom, this massive mosaic? Very few. I can tell you that as a historian, very, very, very few. This, by the way, is the mosaic of the Last Judgment, which is also known as the Golden Gate, and one of the most features of the cathedral, and also dating from the later Middle Ages. Well, St. Vitus Cathedral is one of the most prominent examples of Gothic in the whole world. These are just a few examples so you can get an idea. It contains the tombs of several kings of Bohemia, plus several kings and rulers of the Holy Roman Empire. So if you're into that aspect of history, you must come and visit this at some moment in time. And although the construction began in the 14th century, heavily influenced by French Gothic, it was actually half unfinished for the majority of its history. So due to war and lack of money, more than anything else, it was not completed until the 19th or 20th century. So in that regard, it's also a very wonderful example of how then Neo-Gothic takes over and borrows from Gothic as a way of restoring and rehabilitating, buildings that were in such state of disrepair. It's not just Notre Dame Cathedral. There is actually many more examples across the world, some of which are actually a bit more faithful and perhaps better done in terms of conservation than ones that are most famous. So definitely one of those things that people must see. And then, of course, one of the things that you must do when you are in the area of the castle is explore the further grounds. There is actually a lot of space in the castle beyond the actual buildings. It's just a nice place where to have a stroll. And there is, of course, the specific area of the Golden Lane, which is part of the castle avenues that actually became residential properties. And this is quite famous because the one that I'm pointing out was the home of the writer Kafka for a little while. And again, if you're into the culture of the Czech Republic and Prague in specific, Kafka is one of those things that you must read or at least become aware of. Definitely put it in your radar of international or universal literature, and I think you will experience the world from a very different perspective, so to speak. Now, like I said, this goes beyond the actual district of the castle, so I would encourage you to move past it. I mean, I work at a pretty high speed, and I appreciate I'm not necessarily the best representative of your average day of tourism, but I actually got to Prague castle first light to make the most out of the day, and I did have a guided tour that included both some of the most basic premises of the castle and palace and the cathedral, and I did go up to the spire, which by the way is very, very steep and very narrow, so if you're planning on doing that, be careful. I pretty much did everything that one can do in Prague Castle, and I was done by about 1 p.m. ish, starting at 9 o'clock or so. So I think I spent in the castle about 3 to 4 hours, all things considered, which meant I actually still had a lot of daylight left. And as a result, I decided to go to a place that is one of those places that you kind of have to visit again if you are really interested in the general history of the area, which is this. This is part of Strahov Monastery, which is an incredible complex. And if you like books, if you like history, and if you like religious history specifically, it's a must do. This is, by the way, an abbey that was originally run by the White Canons. It dates from the 12th century, originally from the Romanesque period, and it is renowned because of its libraries. There is two different library halls, which are absolutely amazing, and it's just mind blowing. You can't actually go into the rooms themselves. This was literally taken from the edge of the room. They kind of have like a little sort of a cordoned area where you can actually go and appreciate, because these are some of the largest library spaces, in the country, and some of the best preserved in Europe. This one that you're looking at is the Theological Hall, which was done in the 17th century, and it was the new development for a new library with over 200,000 volumes. This is because previously the libraries of the abbey received some damage during the 14th and 15th century through some flooding and war damage as well. So it led to these new renovations. And then there is the other one, the one that you see here on the right, that is the Philosophical Hall from the 18th century. So, just a few more bits. And it's not just the books, it's also, the very beautiful mobiliary that you see in there, the furniture, and of course the decorations on the ceiling, which are absolutely to die for. On top of that, you also have the church itself, which is what you see in the middle, and something that you 100% must do when you're in Prague. It's have traditional food done the monastic way. Now, what you see here on the left is a modern take, of course, on some of the local food, but in the actual monastery itself, in Strahov, they have, first of all, one of the traditional breweries. So they're still doing their own alcohol in there, but I'll talk more about beer in a few moments. And they have proper menus which borrow inspiration from history and that give you an idea of what people in the country would have eaten traditionally. And whatnot. And the food was absolutely to die for. I didn't book in advance or anything. We literally just turned up in the day. And I don't think we paid more than 25 euros for everything that we ate, which was a lot, because before this there was also dessert and there was a drink. So, 100% deserved the visit. And I also want to point out that this was a very, very cheap monument to visit. It didn't cost more than 10 euros, if so, and it was truly incredible and really one of a kind. So definitely worth the while. Now, if you're not so interested in this, do not worry, because through the back of Strahov Monastery, you have the area of Petrin. Petrin Hill is home to Petrin Tower and also some very beautiful parks. And the tower is one of the most popular lookout areas in the town of Prague. This is free. You can actually go in there, no problem. Or actually, I think they've just included a fee itself to go in. And it's really quite wonderful. I'll show you the views in a moment. Now, the warning is that this is 299 stairs on a helix shape. There is a stair that goes up and a stair that goes down using the same shape. If you're scared of heights like I am, the thing moves a lot because there's a lot of people going up and down, and of course it's done in a specific way to withstand high winds and whatnot. Just be careful, because there is a very hilarious, I have been told, a video of me in this channel as well, in the behind the scenes section, of trying to get down from the platform and it moving so much that I panicked. I panicked so much I go into hysterics. But anyway, it's a beautiful place for the lookout. This was originally created in 1891 as an observation and retransmission tower, and there is actually a funicular that goes up here. If you don't want to take the walk from the monastery, which is about 30 minutes or so, and there is another 20 minutes from the castle to the monastery, there is a funicular that will save you the walking and that can get you straight into it. And of course, as I'm sure you realize, this was inspired by the Eiffel Tower. And this is also one of those monuments that illuminates itself by night. So if you are happy coming up here when it's dark, and whatnot, is also a different perspective of the city, if you see what I mean. Well, the views, by the way, look like this, which I think we can agree are 100% worthwhile. Of course, this is up to your liking, I guess. Maybe you're already happy with the views that you've gotten, from the city hall. Maybe you're happy with the views you may have gotten from the top of St. Vitus Cathedral. I don't know. I actually had all of them, and I don't regret any of them because the perspective that you gain is so wonderful. And being able to actually look at the cathedral and the castle from here, was really insightful to fully understand the size of the city and its development. And well, this is how it looks from the other side and the entrance to the park overall, which is actually, like I said, a very nice park, and of course much more lively and beautiful in the spring and summer months. Now, I'm going to invite you to visit something that a lot of people miss when they go to Prague. And again, if you want to understand the history of this city and a crucial moment in European history, you must visit one of these museums. There is a few museums and even guided tours dedicated to the history of alchemical science and magic in Prague. Now, some of them are more reputable than others, and we can argue semantics, but I would very much recommend that you go to Mysteria Pragensia, which is actually the one that I went to. This is a museum that doesn't contain any proper historical artifacts, in the sense that none of this is historical. These are all recreations to immerse you in this specific moment in history, but it's actually very well done because it uses a building that is real and historical from the 16th century and the area around it, that was actually used as the headquarters by Edward Kelly. And Edward Kelly was actually one of the most incredible developers of the field of alchemy, right there at the turn of the Renaissance period in the early modern world in the 16th century. Edward Kelly was actually commissioned by the monarchy in Prague to do some of his, experiments, and he even was visited by big important names in history such as William Shakespeare. So all of this is part of the study that they've recreated, that we know through different pamphlets and historical documents would have looked like. The entire guide, the entire visit to the actual museum is guided. There is a part of the museum which is the bottom half, where you just have this kind of recreated rooms where they go into a lot of detail into explaining what was alchemy and some of the misconceptions, some of the legends, etc., some of the horror that is associated nowadays with it, but not necessarily actually the point of alchemy and what have you not. And most importantly, they explain the background as to how Rudolf II, who was entirely obsessed with the elixir of youth and other possibilities, such as the ability of turning any metal into gold, was part of the reason why all of this appears. So it's actually a very insightful museum. And again, it's open until quite late. And on top of the museum and the little tower where Edward Kelly also, spent some time in, they have this, which is Kelixir. And if you're looking for an interesting, different kind of place to hang out and have a drink in, very much recommended. It's essentially called the Alchemist Tavern. So the gimmick, I guess, is that everything that you are presented in terms of food and drink has a twist that makes it look alchemical and interesting. And it's actually really cool, very homely, and very comfortable. The people that run it, by the way, are absolutely charming people. And I don't think, except in the summer months when maybe it gets a bit more busy, it's an area that gets particularly crowded because, like I said, there is several of these attractions in the city, some of which are better than others. This is definitely worth the while. And again, it wasn't a very expensive place to visit at all. So engage with these more of the beaten path places. That's what I'm saying. Well, we're now moving on to the day 3, which is exploring Jewish heritage. Now, like I said, Jewish heritage in Prague is abundant, and you could, in reality, and if you wanted to, you could pretty much spend the whole 4 days just exploring Jewish heritage at a slower pace, and you would still get tons out of it. But one of the reasons why you should go to Prague is because, well, it actually is home to the oldest Jewish cemetery in the area, or well, one of the largest in the EU, and the most important because, well, it actually contains a lot of burials that are very, very well documented, and of course, several commemorations to the death of Jewish people during the Shoah and the Holocaust. So definitely one of those places that, for the point of view of education, is very important. If you're interested in Jewish history and you want to understand the Holocaust, but perhaps you don't have the ability to go to places like Auschwitz or a concentration camp, because from an emotional or psychological perspective, it's just not something you think you can handle, which, as someone who has been to them, I appreciate is a hard thing to do. This is, I guess, much more friendly way of engaging with that aspect of history. It's still, emotional and thorough in the explanations, but it's a bit more approachable for sure. And the cemetery is actually very beautiful, and it just helps you understand a lot of things. The majority of the burials that we have in here now are from the 15th to 18th century. Some of them are actually a bit older, and actually, many important local members of the community were buried in here. But it was eventually closed down due to sanitation. I think it was Joseph II that decided that all cemeteries ought to be on the outskirts of the city walls. So again, you get to understand, how cities develop and urban spaces need to be redesigned for the sake of human cohabitation. But the majority of the slabs are still, recognizable. Well, some of them are, some others not so good, but the majority of them still give us some details. The tombs, the proper tomb burials, are from the Baroque onwards and can be quite ornate, and then the ones that are just slabs are the older sections, some of which actually go to the Middle Ages, by the way. And of course, right next to it, it is perhaps one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever been to, which is the Spanish Synagogue. Now, this is now a museum. It's been a museum since 2007, and it is pretty much the museum that explains the history of Jewish people in Prague, in the Czech Republic, and a little bit more in the general context of Europe. Now, the building itself is 19th century beauty from the perspective of Neo-Islamic architecture, which was actually created to replace what was previously the oldest synagogue in Prague, but that was no longer useful. There is actually another old synagogue in the area, the old school, but this became like the new building for the congregation, and it follows the plan of a branch of Judaism, which is called Reform Judaism. You have Orthodox Judaism, you have other more liberal forms of Judaism, just like with Christianity and Islam, is not all a monolith. There is actually different versions of it in that regards. And well, the importance of it all is that it's just absolutely stunning as a building overall. If you like architecture, it's just really beautiful. And from the point of view of the museum and the information that they give, it's actually a very modern and very accessible museum. They have a lot of interactive panels. They have personal items on display, and even though it can deal with some subjects that are a little bit, hard to digest, they do it in a way that it's very respectful and actually, easy for you to get into if you don't have a particularly strong background on the subject. So very much recommend that you visit the Spanish synagogue, because honestly, it's breathtaking. And from the point of view of education, it is absolutely wonderful. And there are other synagogues in the city of Prague, by the way. This is the Old New Synagogue, which is actually part of the Orthodox congregation and currently the oldest active synagogue in Europe. It dates from the 13th century, and it is one of the earliest examples of Gothic in the city from the point of view of, beyond the architecture of religious buildings from Christianity, which is interesting because we don't often see that very regularly. Well, as we're exploring history, and in order to understand a lot of this, we need to go beyond, the 19th century or the specific context of the Jewish community overall. To understand what happened to the Jewish community in Prague, you need to understand what happened to the majority of Czech people throughout history, actually, which is quite a delicate subject. Period well, the overall history of the Czech Republic is very difficult because you see, the Czech Republic is actually an aggregation of different countries. This historically has parts of the kingdoms of Bohemia and Moravia, which are not remotely comparable, and it kind of ended up together out of the different political movements that happen in Europe, in Central Europe, particularly at this moment in time. Now, This is the National Museum, which is actually both dedicated to to natural history and science. Sorry, I should have said as natural science and history in overall terms. The building itself is beautiful. It's from the 19th century, and actually, I have a better picture here from the interior. Just visiting the actual building and the exhibitions, like even if you're not looking very closely at the exhibitions, the building overall is again absolutely wonderful and beautiful, and it really lends itself to tell the history of the country and the exhibits. They have about 14 million items, I think, stored in there. And although this is the central building, there are others, by the way. In fact, I'll talk about one of them in just a second. The main hall, which is what we're seeing here, is actually in Wenceslas Square. And next to it, there is the modern expansion to the museum, which holds the exhibition of modern Czech history, which is incredibly important because it explains essentially the last 100 years of the development of this country, not just, the Second World War, but also the First World War, the problems that the Czech Republic was having already since the 19th century, brewing into what will become the First and Second World War, and then, of course, the Czech Republic under communism, which is something we tend to forget about, but that affected Czech people and the city of Prague specifically quite dramatically, and then the move into a modern day democracy. So 100% recommend. Also very full of dynamic and modern displays, which I think is important, when we're looking at this. And of course, all of this is the beautiful architecture of Neo-Renaissance from 1891. Well, there is also other branches, like I said, of the National Museum, so not everything is stored in the main hall. So if you go across the city, you will eventually encounter this. This is the Ethnographic Museum, which is actually part of the National History Museum that discusses the more local traditions and customs of the Czech Republic. This is actually one of the displays regarding carnival and those kind of more folk parades. And it's a very lovely museum that actually explains a lot of the things most people just don't get about the Czech Republic, which is the countryside, its day-to-day people, and how different cities like Prague are in terms of their history and story from the majority of the country, which is actually quite a rural community and full of beautiful landscapes that shape the life and history of its people. Now, if you are to make it to the Ethnographic Museum, back or going there, you will also see this, which has become quite a popular element in the city of Prague, which is the famous dancing house. This is the collaboration between Frank Gehry and Vlado Milunic, which was created in 1992 to 96. And it's one of the few buildings that has actually been done brand new because the spot where it was bombed. It was actually destroyed in 1945. And as a result, well, it was kind of like an eyesore in the overall landscape of the city, and it was decided that they were going to make it new. And this is what we call deconstructivist postmodern design. In case that you're wondering what type of architectural aspect this is, there you have it. Well, we're now approaching the last day in our 4-day journey in Prague. And these are the bonus highlights. These are places that I don't think a lot of people necessarily visit when they come to Prague, or they don't have in their must-do kind of list, but that are absolutely charming and that I very much recommend that you go and have a look at. Mostly because they're places that without necessarily having any particular previous knowledge, you will get a lot out of them, and they will really shape your view of Prague and the Czech Republic overall. This is the area of Visegrad, which is actually part of the historic fort on the eastern bank of the river, and it's one of the areas that you see from the boat if you do the canal cruise. The area contains a cemetery where a lot of important people are buried, including no other than Alphonse Mucha, since we were talking about him earlier. And overall, this area was developed to its zenith in the 11th century, but it ended as soon as the new castle, of course, was developed as the proper, area of power in central Prague. Then it was remodeled in Baroque as a fortress, which is actually what you see over here. In terms of the fortress, it's actually quite beautiful. And eventually it became a center for training of the Austrian army. So, as a remodeled overall place, you can actually visit mostly this last bit. Whatever was left from the fortress is what is nowadays visible. A lot of the original castle areas were actually destroyed or leveled, but part of that is also this. This is the view that you get actually from Visegrad, and again, you kind of need to move around Prague to fully understand the city and understand its beauty. As you see, the castle is back there at the back. You have a Petrin Tower that you can see very clearly from here. And then, of course, on the other side, the city center. It's a very, very lovely spot. And I actually, I'm aware that, well, maybe not so much in the winter, but in spring and the summer, it's a very popular place for a picnic. And actually, it's one of those places where a lot of people from Prague and the Czech Republic go to celebrate New Year's Eve. And in the area, you also have this, which is the actual Basilica of St. Peter and St. Paul, which is a very lovely church, which was very empty when I went to visit. And that it's originally from the 11th century, but it was very heavily remodeled into neo-Gothic style. Still, it's absolutely stunning building. And if you don't have maybe the budget or time to visit the cathedral, it's like a little, I guess, like a little bonus, if you see what I mean. Now, this is an item that is, I believe, currently being relocated. It is, or rather, under renovation. So you may want to check if you're going to visit Prague if it's actually open or not, or when it will be open again. But this is part of the Dalí Universe Company, which actually has one of the largest private collections of Dalí's work in the whole world. It is absolutely amazing. The displays are very good and informative. It's very comfortable, very accessible as a modern art installation to actually, understand what's happening in here. And it includes all sorts of elements from Dalí's life. It's not just sculpture, there is also furniture, jewelry, paintings. So, it's very rare that you can go to a world-class exhibition like this, again, for what was not a lot of money. This is actually nearby the Wenceslas Square, so you can kind of go up and down the main avenue and you will find this tucked away in a little corner. And again, it was entirely empty. I was the only person in there when I went to visit. Of course, if you find it closed, well, you will not be able to experience this. But it's again to remind you that it's not just, I guess, XYZ museums in specific big cities across the world where we can see Dali and other many things. There are often smaller exhibitions that are just as important, that are very much worthwhile, and that will, give you a different perspective into art, architecture, history, and the rest. Well, since we are approaching the end, I could not avoid talking about this. Beer culture in Prague. Now, Prague has unfortunately in recent years become one of those places that even in the winter months gets a little bit of a bad reputation because it is full of stag do's and hen do's. So, on behalf of all the Czech people who want to live peaceful lives, just calm down, guys. It's actually become quite unbearable, and a lot of people are leaving the city center of Prague because the stag do's are, quite overwhelming. It is true that the city of Prague overall has a very lively nightlife, and for example, in terms of bars and places that are open until late, if you want to kind of travel and go into that direction, you will find plenty of amusements. But particularly in the months where the weather is better and approaching, engagements and weddings, it can be a bit abrasive at night. One of the reasons for that, it's not necessarily something that is done on purpose, but it's the fact that Prague, in many ways, and the Czech Republic are a crucial element in the development of beer history and beer culture. In fact, beer is very much of a key cultural item of the region of Bohemia. This has been one of the places that has been producing beer since the Middle Ages at a very high standard. And in fact, some pretty well known beer nowadays of international brands are Czech, like Budweiser. Budweiser Budvar, by the way, because there is a couple of different brands on Budweiser. So Budweiser Budvar comes from the Czech Republic. Well, production in the area of Prague started since the year 993. So this is what I mean, like with the monastery and in the city center, you will find a lot of places that are dedicated to beer. And this is not necessarily beer for the sake of getting drunk. It's beer for the sake of appreciating the culture and what it meant to the community from the point of view of economy as well as, society. There is actually the place where I took these pictures is the Prague Beer Museum, which is a really cool experience because the museum itself guides you through the history of not just beer making, but the production of beer and how it's changed from the Middle Ages to modern times. And with certain tickets, you also get some beer testing. I think we tasted a lot of, I think, 3 different types of beer, if not 5. We had a lovely conversation with another traveler that was over there from Brasilia, if I remember correctly, and we just hanged out in this museum, which was empty again, apart from us. And it was such a wonderful thing because, I don't really drink and I can't really drink beer anymore. But I had a little bit just to understand, the culture of the area, and it was incredibly insightful because it just opened up to certain aspects of culture and tradition that otherwise I simply would not have been able to understand. Well, the oldest original breweries were connected to monasteries, by the way. So apart from Strahov, there is another monastery in the area of Prague, which is called Brenov, which was actually my first choice. But when I went to visit, it was closed during the days that I was actually there. So Brenov is another monastery that is also very beautiful. And if you want to explore this in the more authentic context of the breweries of the Middle Ages, 100% recommend. And something that I learned what I was myself visiting the museum is that hop production was so important for the Czech Republic that it was like one of the most exports from the area since the 12th century. The impact that this had in the economy, in people's pocket money, and beyond is insane. And it's not something I ever associated with Czechia. Historically speaking, the vast majority of beer that is normally sold in Europe, and particularly from the point of view of places like Spain and the UK, is either local brew or stuff that comes from Belgium and from Germany. And yet, it's actually the Czech Republic in many ways that was pioneer in some of these, developments of different malts and of different varieties of beer. So there you have it. Now, Pilsner, by the way, is the Pilsner Lager is the most important brew in Prague currently, in case that you're looking for some local recommendations. And well, they will give you all the different details, of the city itself. But if you also want to engage into this a bit more, they actually have the Czech Beer Festival in Prague every year in May. It's not like Oktoberfest in Munich. I think it's a bit more sort of social and like a big cultural gathering rather than just a matter of getting drunk, if you see what I mean. But it's actually a very big thing that a lot of people don't even know exists in the city. And of course, a place that I completely forgot to mention, but that is very important, is the opera. When you are in Prague, like in most places in Central Europe that have a connection to the Habsburg and beyond Habsburg, but to the development of classical music, the Opera House is one of those beautiful, iconic buildings and a place where if you can afford the ticket, and to be fair, in this particular case, they tend to be expensive, though sometimes you get lucky, is definitely a must-see building. But not just the opera house, just walking around the city center of Prague in the old town, you actually get to experience theater culture, music, and whatnot in abundance. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, go to Prague and do things that maybe you wouldn't do normally on your day-to-day travels, whether it's Lego, beer, monasteries, or having a nice walk in nature, or going up in a canal or whatever. It's a place where you can do a lot of different things that doesn't have to be the XYZ that every tourist seems to always do when they come to these big places. So as you can see, even in big towns, you can still explore them at different times of the year while still getting the most out of your money, out of your time, and without necessarily having to fall for the tourist traps or the, classic mass tourism places that often cause the problem for the tour guiding industry. And that is all we have to say about Prague today, guys. So thank you so much for listening. We hope that you've enjoyed this rapid but actually very densely packed little tour of Prague. And if you have been to the city or if you're planning on going, we look forward to hearing your comments, questions, and anything else that we can assist you with. And on that front, I shall love you and leave you. Take very good care of yourselves and have a lovely day. Bye bye.